Welcome to Action 2020 Oakland School Board Candidate Forum for District 5, which represents the Fruitvale and adjoining districts. This is the first of 4 forums we will be hosting. The next will be for District 1, planned for June 28th. I am Clarence Hunt, your host. As most are aware, Oakland schools have been facing serious challenges of school closures, budget cuts, policy issues, and a major influence and loss of students and real estate to the so-called charter school movement. We at Action 2020 are a group of residents, parents, and teachers who are determined to see strong supporters of community public schools elected in Oakland this November. For more information about us, please visit action2020oakland.org. The 3 candidates for the District 5 seat joining us today are Michael Hutchinson, Sheila Lawrence, and Jorge Lerman. Mike is an Oakland native and a longtime school board activist. This will be his 3rd run for the District 5 seat. Sheila has worked in schools as both a teacher and an administrator. Jorge is also an Oakland native and has worked as a program and site administrator in the Oakland district. Asking questions on behalf of Action 2020 will be Don McClay, a parent of a high school student and a former candidate for school board himself in 2016. Asking follow-up questions will be Kitty Kelly Epstein, education expert, writer, and radio show host on KPFA. There will be 6 questions. Answers will be limited to 2 minutes. Each candidate will take turns at being the first one to answer. All candidates are free to address the questions and the answers provided by the other candidates as they see fit. All candidates will allow the others to speak in their turn without interruption. Any candidate can call on the moderator if they feel that a question deserves more time. For all time limits, the moderator's decision is final. So let's begin.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Do you guys have any particular order? Anybody volunteer to go first?
I'll go first.
All right, Sheila. And do you mind if I use first names?
No,
Okay.
I don't mind.
Okay, we're on first name basis here. Sheila, the first question is, what is your vision for bringing racial justice to Oakland schools?
Thank you, Don. And first, I just want to thank everybody who put this together. I appreciate the opportunity to share. My vision for justice for Oakland schools is to see a school district where no matter where you live, you have the same facilities. You have access to the same tools that you need to learn. I almost want to say it's kind of like when you go to Target. When you go to Target in Washington, D.C., it's the same Target that you see right here in Oakland. And that's what I'm looking for. I want to be able to travel all over District 5, all of the 12 schools, and see pristine lawns when I drive up. I want to see a driveway where students can be dropped off easily. I want to see clean schools. I want to see healthy food in the cafeteria. I want to see all of the supports that teachers need, administrators need on campus to address the various students that we serve here in Oakland. Yes, we serve a population that is mixed on many levels. We all know that. But I feel that no matter where you live, no matter where you are in Oakland, especially in District 5, you should have access to a school that provides all of the aforementioned qualities. If my vision comes true, which I believe it will if I am elected to the board, I guarantee that we will work together across districts to make sure that this vision happens. No more of this us versus them, no more of this hills versus the flatlands. I don't want to hear that anymore. It's 2020, and it's time for us to come together as a district.
Jorge, you want to give that a try?
Okay, thank you. My name is Jorge Ledma, Oakland born and raised. My parents were immigrants from Mexico. My dad was a replacement worker. When all the guys left for World War II, there was a big call-in of workforce. And my dad liked it here, stayed here, and got all my 5 brothers and sisters were born here. So one way that I want to address this issue of racial equity is eliminating institutional academic failure. And I want to do that. I want to work with people to put a moratorium on standardized testing. I think there is no other, aside from what a policeman may do or a faulty program will do. I think the biggest source of injustice, one of the biggest sources of injustice, is this issue around standardized testing that's labeling primarily children of color, Black and brown kids, always at the lowest quartile. If I didn't know anything about racial inequality, you would say, are Black and brown kids not, their brains don't work? Are they broken? Because that's the kind of impression you get when you look at standardized testing. The other is to expand the curriculum. Right now, it's all built on and on standardized testing too. So we need to expand the curriculum so that it's full spectrum and can include everybody and everybody's modalities. Thank you.
Mike, you get to wrap this one up.
Yes, thank you. I'm Mike Hutchinson. Thank you for having me here today. This is really an issue that's near and dear to my heart. Not only am I a lifelong resident here in Oakland, California, my parents met in the 60s working in Mississippi at a freedom school and freedom summer too. Public education and racial justice within public education is something that my family has worked in and on for generations. And I think we need to be really clear, especially when what we see happening out in the world today. This is our opportunity to have a direct impact in policy in the direction going forward of OUSD. And I think there's a lot of things we can do. When we look at the history of OUSD over the last 20 years, there's been a disparate impact of these policies between the different groups in Oakland. If you live below 580, your neighborhood has been flooded with charter schools. If you live above 580, you still have fully resourced public schools. Those are the things that we need to directly address in terms of racial justice within OUSD. We can also take concrete steps like now with eliminating the OUSD PD. We should not have a police force within our schools, especially when we know that there is a racial justice component to the enforcement going on. You know, OUSD has been shown over and over again that they have not been serving Black and brown students the way they have been serving other students. And it's something we need to explicitly call out and we need to explicitly address. And kind of the last thing with all of this is funding becomes an issue. And there needs to be a racial justice component instilled into our funding. We have enough resources in OUSD to make this happen. It's a question of priorities, and we need a school board who will explicitly fight for racial justice within OUSD.
Very good. I'm going to keep the same order, but this time I'm going to start with Jorge. And for the listening audience, that George is a typo. It's Jorge. Question number 2. In this COVID-19 crisis, what do you believe should be the prerequisites for safely reopening the schools, and what safety policies, such as testing and contact tracing, should be in place when they do reopen? Sir.
Thank you. I think this is an opportunity to reimagine and redesign schools in Oakland. There's a lot of talk of closing down schools. I think that conversation's off the map now. I think we're going to need all our rooms, all our schools to expand the space for children. Naturally, we'll take all the children have to be safe at school and at home, but we also have to bring in the city. The city components are very important so that we're using public space, not just schools, to educate children. I see the classroom now as being both a media center where teachers are able to film and stream curriculum, as well as having probably, I'm envisioning a half the size of the student population at the school at any given time. So a teacher with 30 students would now have 15 present in the classroom, and that lesson plan taped or streamed going out to the other half. Where is the other half? Probably at home, at a recreation center, or a facility that we can find. So I absolutely see not only blended education coming into surfacing, but I see a partnership between the city and OUSD. Thank you.
Okay, Mike, and notice I should have asked Kelly to do a follow-up question. So we're going to do a follow-up questions for both of these first 2 questions when we finish with Sheila. Mike, you're on.
Well, this actually is the big question right now. And there are no good answers. We are in an international crisis, and nobody around the world yet has been able to really figure out the proper answer to this question. And so we need to be very deliberate. And one of the things, before we talk about how reopening, we need to make sure that we acknowledge that we are in a crisis right now. So this is not the time where we are going to produce a new change to our schools lasting into the future. The question is, how do we get through next year's school year with this ongoing pandemic? We can't have our schools open unless there's complete testing, protocols in place if somebody tests positive, and there's social distancing. But that leads to a problem. If we're going to do social distancing in our schools, we need to double or triple our space. And that means doubling or tripling our staffing, which requires a whole lot more funding being poured into our schools to do that. A split schedule is not acceptable. As a community, we are not going to accept that our students go to school 2 days a week. What about families who need to work? We can't just put those students then in rec centers or after school programs because they have the same social distancing requirements. We need to really right now as a community start this conversation between families, community, teachers, and OUSD to come up with the best solution going forward. Because the other thing we know is virtual learning has not worked for a large percentage of our students. So the question becomes, how do we reopen our schools in a safe way in the fall? Because lastly, when we address equity in OUSD, which is a large part of our school's function at this point, we do that in the schoolhouse. And if we don't have the schoolhouse, we cannot address those equity issues. They're only exacerbated. And so I think we really need to turn this question into what we as a community are going to demand as the conditions for our schools reopening in the fall. And we won't have the community pitted against the teachers. We're going to do this all collectively to come up with the best temporary solution for this current crisis.
Sheila.
Yes, I'm in agreement with both of my colleagues that this is a terrible situation that we are in and that we need to work together to come up with a solution. In my previous role as Director of Student Services, at the time when the H1N1 pandemic hit schools, I was in charge of coming up with a plan. And in thinking about what's happened here with COVID-19, I definitely think that first and foremost, we have to follow the guidelines of our health professionals on all levels. I think that schools need to be open. I understand that, there's a lot of unknown, but we have to move forward and come up with a plan where schools will be open. And I think that includes taking a temperature test as students come in. That includes everybody being tested. That includes some way of, if they're confirmed to be confirmed with the virus, then we have a plan for those students and where they go and what they need to do. Yes, families have to work. And I think that not only it's a community problem, it's a national problem. And I think that the federal government as well as the state government need to step in and help families if they are required to stay home with their child because their child has been diagnosed with coronavirus, then there needs to be some kind of provision put in place so that their funding is not halted or stopped because they have to be able to take care of their families. So yes, it's going to be a flipped learning. It's going to be a combination of things that need to happen. Having recently and as of last week experienced distance learning, I know that there are a lot of students who were not able to access their curriculum and education the way that they should have been. But it's my understanding that funding has been provided so that all students in OUSD have access to a device and have access to Wi-Fi.
Can I add a comment? I think the main thing here is that the paradigm of the 3 rows of 10 chairs with the teacher up front is eliminated. It's gone. We have to start looking outside of the classroom. We look at our city, we look at all our schools. We're going to have to recruit parents, volunteers, and sort of redesign the whole. This is the time, we're at a critical junction. And it's like all hands on deck. We're going to redesign this thing, and I have faith that we can do it here in Oakland.
All right. I'd now like to introduce Kitty Kelly Epstein, who is an expert in education. She is a print and radio journalist with a show on KPFA, and she's going to be answering follow-up questions. I should have introduced her after the first question, but I didn't quite do my job right. And now she's going to be doing follow-up questions to the candidates of her choice on the subject of her choice based on those first 2 questions. Kitty Kelly.
So Sheila, I wanted to ask you if you have a response to the issue that was raised in regard to standardized testing. And this is in relation to the first question where we were talking about racial justice as an issue. I wonder, do you consider it a racial justice issue, and are there things that you would do about it?
I understand, Kitty, that Oakland has a history in that it was the first district that implemented IQ tests, and horrible, awful, terrible. Of course, was shocked when I heard this. However, my question is, well, then if we don't do some kind of assessment, how do we know that our students are learning? Yes, I concur that standardized tests aren't by design are biased towards students of color. I concur with that. However, I still feel that we need to have some kind of assessment, either state, national, local, something, so that our students can compete globally. Because that's, for me, the huge problem. I see our students not able to read at grade level. So.
All right, thank you. Mike, you have thoughts about this issue about standardized testing?
Yes, thank you. Yes, it is a huge racial justice issue. Standardized tests can be traced back to IQ tests, which are based on the theories of eugenics, and that you can define and categorize intelligence by race. And not only have the tests themselves been a racist test, but even more so how those tests have been used against us in Oakland. You know, on standardized tests in Oakland, these standardized tests, we have 35% of our students testing at proficiency. And yes, it shows we need to do better by our students, but it also shows we're using a test that we're always going to be deemed failures under. There is a big difference between assessments on academic growth and standardized testing. We need to move to assessments. We need to break free of these high stakes standardized tests with these high penalties. And as much as we can, we need to break free from the policies that require us to use those tests. One of the small benefits from the coronavirus shutdown was we didn't have standardized testing this year in California, that universities erased the SAT requirement. And now we see universities moving to erase that requirement going forward. University of Washington is making it permanently. So I think this is something we need to look at. And yes, it is a racial justice issue.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Sheila. You can go ahead. Those are my questions.
All right. So Mike, this one, you're going to go first, and we'll just keep in the same order going around. Then it'll be Sheila and Jorge. This will be your turn to have the last word. As a board member, how would you work to make OUSD schools happy and caring places for students and parents?
Wow, in 2 minutes. We really need a culture shift in Oakland. To me, a lot of this goes back to 2003 when OUSD was taken over by the state of California. It really severed a lot of the connections that we had in Oakland traditionally. Our traditional neighborhood schools started to be closed and privatized. And it really instilled this adversarial relationship between the school board and the community, between administration and teachers. We need to shift these cultures. And so I think there's a couple of things. For one, hopefully when the new school board is elected in January, they will take explicit steps to make it known that business is not going to be done as usual anymore. It's really important that we change the treatment of the community coming from the school board. So I want to set up a community engagement process that treats the communities as partners and decision makers. Also, we need to set up our school board meetings in a different way where it's not the community coming and begging for relief and the school board ignores them. We need to be able to do things better in that sort of way. The other thing that we need to do is stop the threat of school closures, take that off the table, stop the threat of the growth of charter schools, and really eliminate this cloud of fear that hangs over a lot of our schools, where they feel threatened with closure, or teachers feel threatened with retribution, or families feel threatened with not getting an adequate education. We need to have an activist school board that's going to be in the community, engaging the community, and then help pushing the community's policies forward. I know as a lifelong Oakland resident, what will make the community the happiest is to feel like we're finally back in control of our schools and our neighborhoods. And I know that the community knows best how to make these schools work for us. And so we got to change the power relationship instead of top down. We really need a school board that's dedicated of working from the bottom up and lifting up the community voice that's been there all along.
Sheila.
I am not born and raised in Oakland. So I think that as a board member, I'm going to bring a lens that says that I'm looking at it from a whole different perspective. I've lived in Oakland for a long time. I raised my kids here in Oakland. But I only worked in Oakland 2 years ago. I started working in Oakland 2 years ago. And during that short time, I was fortunate enough to have gotten to know the kids really well, the parents extremely well, and the staff. And the reason why I know that if I am on that school board, that staff, students, parents' community will be happy is because I'm going to be fighting for that kid that I walk to school with every day, who walked through trash, who walked through needles, who walked through whatever, but was eager to learn, wanted to learn, hungry for knowledge. I am standing for that teacher who was prepared every day to deliver a lesson, every day to build relationships with her class, with her class. I am the board member that is going to bridge that gap because I am standing up for those kids. I am not concerned about the kid who wants to be disruptive and doesn't want an education and doesn't value the education, doesn't see that the education is what's going to change his life going forward. I want to do more and help that student, that youth, but I am primarily focused on that 80% of those kids who show up every day and want to learn. And I think that everything that's happened in the past is in the past. We've got to move forward, and we've got to move forward together.
Jorge.
Yes, the first thing we have to realize that many of our schools have been run like feudal castles on the hill that draw up their bridge after school is closed. We need to redefine, reimagine our schools so they become community centers. Our schools should be open almost 24 hours a day, and that there is community services available at the schools depending on the severity or the need. So I think that schools is the last place in our community where the American flag flies, and I'm not talking about the right-wing American flag. I'm talking about the real flag that represents our true values in this country. And yet that's kind of a lonely sight. It's sort of like the last outpost of civilization. Well, let's not make it the last outpost of civilization. Let's make it the beginning of a new movement to re-empower each school community and put some muscle behind when we talk about equity and quality education. It's only going to start by re-engaging with the community and having the school as the center of all that. The school is the heart of the community.
Kitty?
You know, there's a sign hanging over a expensive public school, a private school in Pismo Beach that says the goal of education is to be happy. And I have never seen that as a standard in any public school in the United States. So I'm wondering, I'd just like to dig a little bit more into this happy thing. Do we want the kids to be happy? Do we care if they are? Does it make any difference? Or we just want them to be disciplined and orderly? Mike, you want to take that on?
Sure. And I want to start off by saying I disagree with some of the stuff I just heard from the other candidates. I believe in 100% of our students and that we need to be able to serve all of our students. I got into this work after working for 20 years in our schools. I was at Santa Fe Elementary and Maxwell Park Elementary before they were closed in 2012, and that's when I shifted my work. But before that, I was on the site, usually 10 hours a day. We set up after school programs, Saturday school, field trips. We know how to do this within Oakland. And the families were very happy being able to engage in those services. I think engagement and enjoyment,
30 seconds,
rather than happy is what we should be looking at. And I think it's really easy to walk on a school campus and see if there's that enjoyment in learning, if the families feel welcome there, if the staff is enjoying their job. And I think it's real easy to do assessments of that. You can actually walk on most campuses and see. But the problem has been the school board and OUSD administration have created this cloud of fear and distrust that have disrupted our ability to find that happiness. And that's why we need leadership that's going to direct from the community and put that as a primary concern.
Jorge, you got any ideas about how kids can be happy?
Oh yeah, this is a favorite topic of mine. Uh, I think that we have to reintroduce the arts, music, dance. When I was a kid, we had music books. It was part of the curriculum. You got your math book, your geography book, and you got a music book. You learned a bunch of songs. Now that sounds really old school and it probably ages me. But I think those are the things that kept us together, that brought joy to the school. And then not having all the curriculum based on preparing kids for the standardized testing. If we could have a full spectrum curriculum where we're looking at ethnic studies, at Black studies, at women empowerment issues, and touch on the topics that represent the issues in the classroom, that touch on the topics of the cultures and identity in the classroom, that will go a long way to improving and making schools an enjoyable experience.
Sheila, you have thoughts about this and also about the attendance issue. Actually, 80% of the kids don't go to school every day. So is there some way the school could be happy enough that they'd want to be there? I guess that's one of the questions, right?
Well, when I said 80%, what I'm saying are the 80% that actually were at school, right? That you had a combination of students who were there ready to learn, and then the teacher was there ready to give the lesson. But then you had those few 3, 5 kids who they weren't able to engage. And why? Because they can't read. So of course they're going to act out. They're traumatized. They had things that happened last night that they saw, that they witnessed. Of course, they can't access what's going on in the classroom. The final thing I want to say about the schools, yes, I concur 100% that schools need to be those sanctuaries that they used to be, that everybody was drawn to, that helped, to make that place a special, happy learning place. That's the kind of happy, that to me, that's what happiness was being at school learning.
Thank you.
Are we done?
We're done.
Okay, so Sheila, it's your turn again to be first. What I'd like to do this time is start with you and then rotate the other way, going to Mike and then Jorge last, and then we'll go to Mike and then to Jorge to be first answering the next few questions.
Okay.
That sound good for everybody?
Great.
All right, so question number 4. In Oakland, groups like the Black Organizing Project and many others have long advocated for the removal of police from the schools. Would you vote for or against keeping police in our schools if elected to the board? Sheila.
Yes, if elected to the board, I definitely would be in agreement for the police department to be eliminated. When I used to be in charge, I was a dean in San Francisco. And so I was in charge of discipline, and I worked closely with the police department, with the probation department, and was told that, we have to be strict with these students. And usually they were talking about Black students, because every district that I've worked in, the stats are the same. So that's why this whole thing about Oakland being someplace special and having unique problems, I don't buy it. I just don't buy it. And I just think that the cops, they're just doing way too much anyways. So no, absolutely, I think they need to go. Absolutely, the funding that we were spending or are spending on them should be going directly to teacher salaries, should be going directly to support and counseling, social workers, mental health support at the schools. Absolutely. And there, one of my friends who's a total critic says, well, then what are you going to do when you have a real problem going on at the school? Who are you going to call? And my response is that, well, if things are in place the way that they should be, everybody has a role to play in safety, in redirecting behavior, because that's all we need to be doing is redirecting behavior. Oakland already has a wonderful restorative justice program that's in place. We have wonderful programs already in place. We just need more funding and more people to bring them to fruition.
All right, Mike is going to be next. We have a little technical issue here, is that Mike cannot actually see the timekeeper. So Mike, would you like me to tell you the time, or if I held up 3 fingers to mean 30 seconds, what would you like?
Yeah, if 30 seconds or 10 seconds or time, just to, yeah, just
No, but just, do you want me to say something, or do you want me to hold up fingers?
saying something.
Okay, so you're on, Mike.
Okay, thank you. So that is, the answer to the question is an emphatic yes. If I'm on the school board, actually, if the school board does not vote on June 24th to eliminate the police force from the schools, if I'm elected and sworn in January, one of the first actions I will make sure to take is to reintroduce the resolution and ensure that we have police-free schools. I've worked a lot with BOP over the last almost 10 years. You know, BOP was founded after Raheem Brown was killed by school district police in 2011. We do not need a police force in our public education system. We are the only school district in Alameda County to have its own police force within our school district. And this is not a budget or a funding issue. This is a moral, philosophical decision. I do not believe our public education system needs to have an armed police force, period. And that's where we need to move from. And I think it sends a message to the community and to the students to have armed police patrolling our youth within the schools. And I think as a school board member, this would be something that I would really be fighting to move to a different place. Families are required by law to send their minors to school. And then we are responsible for their safety while they're in school. We should not be subjecting them to armed police. And if you read the actual reports from OUSD, you'll see that the highest categories are for 5150 for mental health issues, for students who run off campus, or to do perimeter searches. These are not even functions that we should ever call police for. So we need to eliminate the police. We need to fully implement BOP's plan and kind of repurpose our school site security officers. And this is also goes back to the previous question. This is how we make happy, enjoyable school sites. It is key that we don't have armed police on campus.
And Jorge, you get to go finally on this one.
Oh, okay, thank you. Of course, I have to say this, the police didn't put themselves there. The police were brought in because there was the lack of a will to deal with the kinds of issues and conditions that people had in the schools. It was much easier to bring in a policeman and chase the problem away than try to solve it. Now, I am in agreement that they were misused and misplaced. And then now, if we're going to take the police out, what happens next is crucial. And I don't want to see bureaucracy replaced with bureaucracy. As a site administrator, too many times I saw the school psychologist, psychiatrist, the speech therapist, and everybody that you had in town in a big white circle with either a black or brown parent. And now those people didn't have a gun or a billy stick, but they had big fingers that they would point at those parents and say, your child is suffering from this and that. So what I'd like to see is community-based organizations. Those people that are living in the community come in and deal with setting up programs of equity and conversations to deal with the many issues that exist in the schools. Yes, there's always an element of crime or something that happened where you do call the police. I don't think that eliminating the police meant that you're not going to call the police if you have to. At least that's how I understand it. And then the other thing is, it's got to be, the solution is going to be, we're bringing back the parents and the community to solve the issues, not bringing in another series of bureaucracy to replace bureaucracy. Thank you.
Kitty, your microphone is off.
I'm so sorry. So I want to ask this complicating question about the Oakland Police Department, which is that at one point there was an effort to reorganize this whole thing about what happens with police in schools. And one of the things that happened was the Oakland Police Department took big advantage of it and would show up 2 hours late when there was a burglary at night at Fremont High and charge the school district incredible amounts of money because, you know, they make these high salaries. And, you know, but then they'd be 2 hours late, so they wouldn't get back the computers that had been taken or whatever it was. So how does this relate to relating to the Oakland Police Department? Sheila, could you start?
I'm sorry, Kitty, I'm not clear on what your question is.
Well, if the Oakland Public School Police Department is disbanded,
Mhm.
how does the school district relate to the Oakland Police Department, which is not being disbanded, at least at this moment? And where in the last time there was an effort in this direction, what they did was take advantage of it to make more money for their Oakland Police Department by charging the district these huge amounts of money for things like that. You could decide you were not going to call the police on students ever, and that's something I pretty much, you know, would think was good. But there are things like big burglaries at Fremont High, which happen, and then the police show up and then they charge whatever they charge. So how does that get reorganized as far as the district relationship to those kind of issues?
I see. Well, I think that it sounds to me like there has to be a conversation with Oakland PD about how they're going to service our schools. I mean, they're still going to have to service us, but not in the capacity that they're servicing us in at this time. In working in other districts with other police departments, they would assign 1 or 2 police, you know, to work within the schools, and they would have to work all the schools and do all of the investigations. And as far as a budget for 2 police officers, I mean, that, you know, I would think that is a little bit more palatable than whatever the number is, 11 or however many that are currently employed. So it's a conversation with the mayor. It's a conversation with the community organizations that want to help. Because like you said, I mean, there are certain crimes that police are supposed to solve, and that's their job. That's what they're supposed to do, is solve crime. So to say that the relationship will be completely severed is unrealistic. And I think that we have to get back to where police are, if they do come to schools, it's for something positive.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, I worked with youth directly for 20 to 25 years in some of the tougher neighborhoods in the East Bay. I never once called the police. And I think there is a moral question that we really need to answer here. I don't think there's a full understanding of what the school police actually do and how they're used within our district. They're not being called to our school sites to solve crimes, but they're being called to our high schools every day. And our youth are being put into contact with armed officers. I want to point out again that we are the only school district in Alameda
30 seconds
to have its own police force. So obviously everyone else has figured out how to do this. There are distinct differences here. Protecting our school district property, especially in off hours, is one issue. But having armed police in our schools engaging with our youth is unacceptable. And we as a community want to see a moral decision made that we will not have armed police hired by our public education system. And I think that's a clear line that I would ask everyone to hold.
Jorge, thoughts about this?
Yeah, I think it's one thing to have a police or security force that deals as old sexist term, watchmen, or that check windows or doors and drive around the city checking that things are safe. That's one thing. The issue is police handling relationship issues at the school amongst children and with the teachers and other adults. That will require a whole different kind of strategy. And so I'm suggesting that I would even add SSOs, the school security officers. sometimes they engage in less than professional behavior and standards themselves. So I would keep that model, but there needs to be reinforcement of professionalism for the SSOs, because they're the ones that have the most to deal with the day-to-day contact with students. And so a lot of cultural competency, bilingual people, cultural diversity too has to be taken into consideration. I think we could do that. I think it is a good step and a positive step to remove armed officers from the schools. That I'm in total agreement with.
Thank you.
Are you finished, Kitty?
Yep.
I would like to ask the moderator's permission to ask my own follow-up question.
Go for it, Don.
Thank you. Why don't we start with Jorge, and then we'll go Sheila, and then the mic. I just can't imagine this subject being addressed without addressing the deployment of restorative justice with it to resolve our problems inside the school. Jorge, could you start on that?
Yeah, I think the restorative justice movement is the heart of all this. It's not the only thing. We used to call it conflict management. Now we call it restorative justice. But in the future, we're going to have to call it community building and changing the culture of the school. I'm not talking about the culture of the kids' individual identity. I'm talking about every school has a culture. And if that school either in how it treats the students and how it offers services. So I would just say that, yes, restorative justice is the heart of this movement.
Sheila.
When I came to Oakland, I was so impressed with the restorative justice practices that were already in place at the schools. And so, you know, it's just a matter of the student. I think that we need more students involved early on, like elementary and as they transition into the middle schools, to be trained so that it's a part of the culture. It's just what we do and how we resolve things. And I think that one of the things that I've seen or that I've experienced is that I've had students come back and tell me, thank goodness we had that practice in place because it saved my life. So I'm all for it.
Mike?
Yes, of course, we need to support restorative justice and restorative practices on our school sites. But I want to be very clear so we don't set up this false dichotomy or false choice. This isn't a choice between police or restorative justice, or at least that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we need to make a moral decision not to have armed police within OUSD. And we need to build the kind of schools that rely on restorative practices going forward. And I don't want to link those two together. You know, as we are moving to defund the police within our school district, this is not a cost-saving measure or even a policy decision. This is a moral decision. And lastly, this is why also we want to have schools that the community is control of, with sustainable community schools, because we know the community knows best. And we know the community will intuitively put in restorative practices to the schools that they create. And so that is how we need to shift this dynamic, not police and top-down administration, but from the community using restorative practices going forward.
All right, the next question is a bit of a whopper. We're going to start with Mike. And I would like to let you guys know that the online audience wants us to make sure that there's some time for them to ask questions. So let's try to be concise. And if you don't use up all your time, that you'll be helping us make sure that the audience has time for what they have to say. Frankly, we're doing pretty well with time and the whole thing is proceeding pretty well. So Mike, we'll start with you. You ready? So to go Mike, Jorge, Sheila. So what will you do about the fact that the state continues to have a veto power over district decisions through the power of FCMAT, F-C-M-A-T, the Fiscal Crisis Management and Assistance Team, and the state trustee? Will you challenge their role and take action to regain full local control? Will you oppose school closures and the sale of public property? Mike Hutchinson.
There's a lot of questions there built into one question. So yes, I oppose school closures. I have opposed school closures since 2012 when the two schools I worked at were closed. We fought very hard over this issue, and I will immediately end the blueprint process. I'll also end the 7-Eleven process and the process to sell our public property. I also want to call for a full audit of OUSD so we can really have a conversation of not just what the official numbers are, which we know, but also how that money's being used and where it's coming from and where it's going. We need to make those official numbers apparent. Because the problem with FCMAT right now is FCMAT reports to the state numbers that are different than the official numbers that OUSD reports to the state. And so what we need as a school board is we need a school board that's going to actually fight around what the real numbers are. We have not been in a budget or financial crisis the last 2 years. Over the last 2 years, we've actually accumulated a $50 million surplus just from these last 2 budget years. So FCMAT might try to say that there's a structural deficit, but it's not true. And one of the things that people don't fully realize is FCMAT is back in our lives, not because of the state takeover in 2003, but because this school board passed a resolution 3 years ago inviting them back in. So I will actively work to make sure FCMAT is out of our lives. I will actively work to fight to make sure the real numbers are recognized because we don't have a structural deficit. And lastly, the reason why FCMAT and our current school board have really tried to engineer a crisis is because they want the state to come in and control things so they can unilaterally close schools and sell property, because we as a community have made it clear that we don't want that to happen. And so, yes, I will go all out to make sure we have full local control over all of these decisions and that the community is finally in full control of our school district.
Jorge.
I think the key to whether it's school closures or the FCMAC relationship has to do with bringing back the parents, engaging our community, and mobilizing and organizing and making the case for our Oakland schools. We can get lost in the details and the technicalities and who's doing what. That's too much castle intrigue for me. I just want to know how we can clean up the mess that we have. Yes, I believe that everybody can improve their performance in downtown and the accountants and all that. But I also do know, I do believe there is a physical crisis. I'm not denying that. But I think in the middle of this, we have put our parents like a tennis game. They keep watching one side, the ball going this way, going that way. It's like, stop the game. Let's get in the game. And I think that we can do that by organizing, mobilizing, and making a case directly to Sacramento. So again, if selected and working, I'm willing to work with the school district, local politicians, regional politicians, and clear up maybe not even just the issues in Oakland, but the whole surrounding area. This has become too complicated. And I don't like complicated things. I like to keep it simple. And so I'm for mobilizing, organizing, going to Sacramento, making our case, having the parents make the case.
All right, Sheila?
I am definitely opposed to closing schools, and I am a big proponent of neighborhood schools. In the districts where I've worked, where FCMAC has been called in, they've been called in as a third party to review based on the data that was provided to them by the various departments. So when I hear someone say that there was a surplus, I'm confused, because if there was a surplus, then there would be no need for FCMAC to come in and do any kind of review. I am also in favor of going to Sacramento and saying, hey, give us a break with the debt because of all the various things that have happened in Oakland. But this idea that the state wants to take over our district, I'm having a hard time understanding what it is that they would benefit from taking over our district. if the benefit is to close schools and to add more charter schools, so this could be charter heaven, that is very interesting to me. I'd like to know how it is and what it is that they would benefit from. How does that benefit the state? That is my question. So I am a person, again, who I've had experience with FICMAC. We, as the district, we were obligated to provide them with data. They reviewed the data as a third party. So anything else that FICMAC is doing or wants to do, I believe, is as a third party. It's not to bring Oakland USD to Sacramento and have Sacramento run this district. I don't think they want to do that. If they wanted to do that, they would have done it a long time ago. And again, I have a question about this $50 million surplus, because I'm wondering, do you really understand how the budget works?
So I have a follow-up.
Kitty, before you start,
Please, on this one.
Kitty, before you start with a follow-up, wait a second here. We're getting a few audience questions. I would like the technical people, Hillary and Matt, to start sending them to me on the chat. And I know this is the biggest question of the bunch. Clarence, do you want to give Mike another word before Kitty starts her?
Right, Mike, we have 1 more minute.
All right.
I think this is really a question that really separates the three of the candidates here. This is not castle intrigue, and this is not confusing. And I think it's really important that any school board member understands that the state took us over in 2003 using FICMAC. This isn't a crazy conspiracy. This is a pattern based on 20 years of history. So 17-18 fiscal year, OUSD ended the year with a $29.6 million surplus, according to the closing of the books numbers sent to the state. 18-19, they ended the year with a $21.4 million surplus, according to the official numbers. Those are the official numbers from the SACS reports that are sent to the state. There is no question about that. And when the state took over Oakland in 2003, what the state administrator did was close our public schools and open charter schools. So now we have the highest rate of charter schools in the state of California. This is the issue. We need school board members who understand the budget, understand where the numbers are, understand what the official numbers that have been reported to the state, which are the numbers of record, and have a plan for how to reprioritize the budget, make sure we have things going forward.
All right, Kitty.
So the state took over the district in 2003. They've never left. We got back partial local control, and we had FICMAT in charge with veto power over the district's budget for 17 years. And the situation gets worse all the time. So we don't have control of the district. And if you get elected to the school board, you'll have partial control, just like people do now. And so one question to you is, will you call this out? Will you say, because FICMAT does all of this behind the scenes. They just went and got a new piece of legislation in Sacramento saying Oakland is required in the ed code, required to close schools. This is a brand new thing they just did in the last couple of weeks. So will you bring it up? Will you say that they have to do whatever they're going to do in public? Will you talk about it? Because the public doesn't know. The reason the public doesn't know, partly, I mean, there are a lot of reasons, but one of them is that nobody says what's going on behind the scenes. Will you try to find out what's going on behind the scenes and actually tell people about it?
Could I ask the three, excuse me, I'd like to ask the three candidates to answer that fairly quickly. Sheila, why don't you start?
Yes, I will. That's all I have to say. And my past, my history is that I'm going to do the research and find out for myself, and I will share it and be transparent and share it with my community, because I want them to know and understand it for what it is. The reason I question about the surplus with the budget is because I know that most people don't understand how the budget works. Yes, there are times you're going to have a surplus and then you're going to have a deficit because it's based on what the governor says.
Okay.
Okay, Mike?
Yes, and let me just say, out of the last 6 years, we've had a yearly budget surplus. So I think it's really important. One of the things we need to do as a community is have an understanding of the numbers and FICMAC. And I have been doing this consistently. Not only have I spoken at all the school board meetings around budget issues and on FICMAT, if you check my social media presence, I've done write-ups about FICMAT and the budget. It has been my mission over the last 3 years to make sure people know the real budget numbers, because we've been told this false narrative. And so I encourage everyone to go look at the numbers that I've been sending out for the last 2 years. The unaudited actuals, the closing of the book numbers, they're listed on the OUSD website, and there's not a debate around these numbers. So yes, I'm going to continue calling this out. And my mission as a school board member is to have full community control of our schools, from the state, from the county, and to make sure our communities at our school sites are empowered as decision makers to make the decisions we all need to make going forward.
Jorge?
Yeah, I think it's important that we understand that Oakland is a victim of circumstances by this type of legislature that comes up, that I'm not even aware of this latest one that you mentioned. But all I know is that we have to challenge the way entitlements work in this state, so that you have big agriculture, corporation tax breaks, you have the prison industrials complex system, the police criminal justice system. There's any number of areas that are taking away, that have been spared, have gotten waivers from contributing to education. We have to make education the first topic, and in Oakland, the most important topic of all.
Thank you. And Don, they would like for us to take a audience question. I think you know that, and I think there's a couple up there. Okay, let's see. Wow. Okay, here's one. Please describe your support of the teachers union during the OEA strike last year, and how do you plan to collaborate with labor unions if you're elected?
Is that on this subject?
No.
Then why don't we wait for audience questions and bring that out?
I think that Hillary was asking us to bring up an audience question. You want to wait till the end?
Yeah, we only have one more of our questions.
Okay,
great. And then we're getting them queued.
I'm just trying.
Are we good, Clarence?
Yeah, we'll finish
Okay.
with your question.
Okay, before I move to the next question, I have a question for all three candidates, and I want a yes or a no answer. Does the OUSD need an independent, in-depth audit? Yes or no?
Yes.
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 Okay, good enough. The next, and this is the last of our questions, then we'll go on to audience questions. Jorge, you get to go first. So the question is, Oakland now has an enormous number of students in charter schools. What effect does this have, and what policies would you advocate? How would you relate to the money spent on election campaigns by the charter industry?
Well, look, I have trouble with spending public money on private enterprise. The charter school movement has issues with collective bargaining. They're reluctant to accept children with special education. They have trouble with admitting language different students. I know that they serve the interests of a certain group of parents, and those parents are Oakland residents. So I want to stand with them and have them understand what's at risk here. Oakland has lost $50 million to charter schools. Now, I will make a proposal, and this is it. I would ask the charter schools leave their corporate sponsors and come back into the Oakland Unified School District family, so that under our supervision and accountability and sharing of resources. I have no trouble with that, because then it will be a one Oakland. We'll all be operating under the same rules. Thank you.
Sheila.
Oh, I thought I was going last this time.
You're right. Or am I doing it backwards? Yeah. Michael.
Sure. Thank you. I've been, first, I think as a community, we need to understand that the proliferation of charter schools happened while we were under state control from 2003 to 2009. This was not something that the community ever asked for. This was imposed on us from day one in these sorts of numbers. And in Oakland, the charter schools have almost entirely been placed in low-income communities of color. And we know in Oakland, when we've seen families and communities in the hills not have charter schools placed there, and that these charter schools have only been placed in other neighborhoods, if you're familiar with Oakland, you know what that means. And so I even testified at the Department of Education in 2013 about the impact of school closures in charter schools in Oakland. This is something I've been working on long term. But what I was really involved with was last year, the passage of Assembly Bill 1505, which becomes law on July 1st. And for the first time, this gives us tools as a community to deny new charter school applications and to start to close the low-performing charter schools through renewals. This is something that I took 5 or 6 trips to Sacramento to help make happen. I was part of a network of statewide folks who really organized around this. It's why I have a good relationship with both Rob Bonta and Tony Thurman. And we're really excited that if we have a school board that will fully implement Assembly Bill 1505, we've done the work over the past 12 months to put the tools in place for the school board to do that. So this should be school growth. And we really need to look to close the low-performing charter schools. And secondly, we need to really lift up our neighborhood public schools. And those two things combined will definitely stop charter growth, but also begin to grow back our public education system.
All right, Sheila?
I agree 100%. I think that we have way too many charter schools, and it's my understanding that it is as a result of what happened in 2003. However, it was also a result of families feeling like they weren't getting what they wanted from their local school and wanted another option. I am in agreement with the passage of the recent legislation, because charter schools do not have the same, they're not held to the same standards that traditional public schools are held. And I feel that we need to do everything that we can to decrease their numbers, to make it difficult for them to obtain new locations to start up. And if they're going to start up somewhere, it needs to be outside of Oakland. I have friends, colleagues who've started their own schools, wonderful people who worked in public education for years. So I understand how they come into being. They want something a little different. One of my buddies, Ray Culbertson, just opened up a school, and his focus is on preparing the students for global learning. Same thing that we're supposed to be doing in our schools right now. So why do we need a charter school for that? So I am 100% in agreement, and will, as a board member, will do everything I can to make sure that the new law is fully implemented with fidelity.
In terms of a time check, we're at 3:08, and so I think we're going to take we're going to try 5 questions. Like to ask the candidates to confine your responses to about 1 minute, please.
All right. So Kitty, don't want to cut you off. Can we forego follow-up questions on this last one?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so I'll read questions still, and you still do follow-ups if needed?
Yep.
All right. We got a volunteer to go first. You want an easy question or a hard one?
I'll go first. I went first last time.
You're a good volunteer. Okay, audience question, saying that District 5 has a large Mam population. Those are Native people from Northern Guatemala. The questioner thinks that there's not a written version of the language and the people cannot read Spanish. It's true that they cannot speak Spanish. So how do we make sure that all pertinent information gets out to all of the parents? And I'd like you all to do a 1 minute, starting with Sheila.
Yes, I experienced this firsthand when I was at United for Success Academy. And what I did was either I grabbed a student, which was not ideal, or asked for the family to provide someone that could communicate with us, on our behalf. And we did the best that we could to communicate with them, but I completely concur that we need to add them to our lists of languages so that they can be informed of what's going on.
How about you, Mike?
Yes, this has actually been one of the many problems that's occurred since the state took over OUSD in 2003. It used to be at least OUSD would translate all materials into 5 languages. Now we're at the point where the school board doesn't even translate the school board agenda into Spanish. And so we've had these Zoom meetings now, school board meetings, with no translation made available for anyone. And so this has been a huge problem. And this goes back to really having a school board and leadership that authentically wants to engage with the community. And so first, we need to bring back the 5 designated languages that everything's supposed to be translated into. And then internally within OUS, there needs to be a department that explicitly makes sure that all the languages of OUSD's families have access and have either translation services or some way so we don't intentionally leave parts of our community out. And so unfortunately, this is a much bigger problem than just one language. We really need to move back to a district that's looking to encompass the whole community in everything we do.
Jorge?
Yeah, this issue with the Hmong community is very, very serious because it does embolize the whole problem. Before the Hmong community, it was the Min community. They, in their native land, in a rebellion against Chinese overlords, they refused to write and read Chinese as the language. So there's a history behind all these things that happen. But I agree. So we need to recruit community outreach workers represented by the communities and the people that exist there, either community-based organizations or faith organizations. A lot of these communities are very involved with their faith church or organization. So go there, organize, hire people, and start bringing everybody together.
All right. Now we have, Kitty, do you have any follows on this?
No.
Now we have the most voted on question. Please describe your support of our teachers union during OEA's strike last year. How do you plan to collaborate with our labor unions if you are elected? And I'm going to choose you to go first, Jorge.
All right. I was out there in the picket line at Franklin School where my wife was a teacher. And so between spending 3 and 4 hours and taking her lunch and taking lunch to the other people, I got to know what the issues were and worked with people in trying to get the information out to the community. So I believe in collective bargaining. I believe in all teachers having a living wage, and we can work through this. I'm totally open to it, and I want solutions to come from the teachers, not just the administration giving solutions to the teachers.
Sheila?
During the strike, at that time, I was a counselor. I was inside supporting students. I was there every day supporting teachers. I concur that we need the collective bargaining unit. However, given that I had worked in other districts, I was appalled at the salary schedule that the teachers have to endure in this district. And I want to do any and everything that I can possible to make sure that our staff receives a living wage here in Oakland. And if that means that I'm seen as, the bad guy because I didn't join the union, well, so be it. I think that there's more that we need to do, and that the current union leadership, they're good people. They want to do the right thing, but they're not strong enough. And as a board member, I'm going to make sure that first and foremost, that we get a decent salary schedule for our staffs.
All right, Mike.
Yes, first, I would never cross a picket line. My mom's been a member of OEA for 50 years. So not only was I out with OEA on this last strike, helping them all that I could, it wasn't my first strike that I've been involved with in Oakland either. I'm really proud of the fact that during OEA's strike, I was part of a small number of folks in the community who were actually meeting with OEA at their offices to really help support them directly. I'm really proud also in this past week, OEA just voted to endorse me in District 5. And so I'm really excited about this partnership that we can have going forward. And I want to really stress that it's a partnership. This is not,
30 seconds.
We don't need teachers to dictate to the community. We don't need a community to direct all of their fire at teachers. We need to really figure out a way as school communities, students, families, and teachers to come together and really come up with the best solutions for all of us. So I'm really excited moving forward that we can really push this relationship and really turn around our schools in Oakland.
Okay, next question is, and Mike, would you mind starting on this one? How are you going to handle competing priorities between district schools and charter schools in District 5?
Well, that's very easy for me. I do not believe that charter schools are public schools. Charter schools receive public funding with no public oversight. And so as a school board member, it'll be my job to manage, support, and hopefully grow and expand our public education system in our public schools. And so that's not even an issue for me. Not only will I not do the bidding of charter schools, one of my real criticisms of the charter school law is that it allows charter schools to be considered as public and benefit and feed at the public trough. I will actively work to stop that as much as I can. I will stop the utilization formula for Prop 39. I will get some clarity to the lawsuit that we still haven't heard what our school board is negotiating on our behalf. And like I said, last year I worked with Assembly Bill 1505. I'll be actively engaged again with our state network to see what other relief we can get from the state in terms of new legislation being passed. And so that is my mission. I want to grow back our Oakland public schools, and that is not charter schools.
Jorge.
Well, I believe in closing the failing charter schools. I believe in that we should work with the charter schools. The fact is they exist, they've been given a place. I don't want to fight that, keep that civil war going. I understand we should be working, have the same accountability, the same responsibilities. And most important of all is that we have hundreds of students that live in Oakland and parents that go to these schools. I cannot abandon them. I have to be a voice for that community and to improve whatever situation they're in. So I cannot turn my back on charter schools. I can be critical of them, but I can't turn my back.
Sheila.
Yes, I'm in agreement that we do have too many charter schools, and I would do whatever I could to have that number reduced. As I said before, I have friends, parents, colleagues who are currently attending charter schools, so they are serving a purpose. I do not agree that they are not held to the same standard as traditional public schools, and I feel that we've got to do something about that. They don't, it's not fair that they get to dump students mid-year just because, it's going to harm their numbers. Not fair. Our schools are open for everybody, every kid, every day. So should their schools be. So if they want to come to the table and play, they need to play by our rules.
All right, Kitty, do you have any follow-up questions either on the strike or the competing interests between the charters and the regular schools?
It's related to those, but it's a different question. In relation to the concept of a failing school, and I'm not talking about charter schools now, I'm talking about overall, because the idea of a failing school came from, George Bush and a bunch of other people who decided that they were going to find ways to
failing president.
Public schools, right? Various presidents have attacked public education through the concept of a failing school. So I just wonder if you could real quickly say, not in relation to charters, in relation to in general, because my understanding of a failing school from this federal legislation is it's all test scores. So what's your definition of a failing school in terms of, and now I'm talking about public schools also, or primarily?
You want all three to answer that?
Yeah, if you can answer quick. I know I asked.
Why don't we start with Jorge, because you used the term.
Okay, thank you. I agree. That term does not come from the community. Failing schools is a political term, and it's a way to label mostly Black and brown children. Well, that's why I want to see a moratorium on standardized testing. And I do believe in assessment, but child-based centered assessment that really helps the Jamals and the Jorges and the Lupitas. And it tells us, and it breaks down why it can't read by the 3rd grade. So this concept of failing schools has to do with exactly the standardized testing and removing that as a criteria of judging our students.
Thank you. Mike,
Sheila?
Sheila,
Oh, you go ahead.
either one.
I'm just going around the way I see them on
Okay,
the
go
screen.
around the way. I'm sorry.
Plus,
Sounds pretty
Sheila
tall.
keeps volunteering to go first. Why don't you go, Sheila?
Well, see, I was ready to go last this time. Okay. My definition of a failing school is similar to what I was explaining earlier, in that the majority of the kids that I got to know and love wanted to learn. They were hungry for knowledge. So, and as well as the teachers, hungry to give it to them, right? So in my mind, a school is failing if all of the students aren't engaged. If all of the students aren't engaged, then it's a failing school. And like I said, you got 3 to 4 kids in every class that need that extra support. And so that's our job, is to figure out who they are early, not when they're in middle school getting ready to go to high school. We know this in 4th grade. We know in 3rd grade what they need. So I feel like we're failing them if we're not reaching and engaging all of them.
Thank you.
Mike.
Yes, we do not have failing schools, but we do have schools and communities that have been failed. And I think it's very important that we don't blame the victim in all of this. You know, and to go back to the last question about charters, I, of course, would never propose turning our back on families and students, but that's not what we've seen happen in Oakland. What we've seen in Oakland is the state administrator come in, or the school board vote to close our public schools, and the next year, those schools reopen as charter schools. That's what's happened in Oakland. We've been privatized. It hasn't been people fleeing our school district and then finding charter schools as the option. We've had our neighborhood schools decimated, where charter schools become the only option. So I know in Oakland, things being equal, every family would rather walk to their neighborhood school. It is the school board's job to make sure those everythings are equal and that we lift up our public schools. And that is how we will really start to build the kind of schools we want. Our schools are not failing. They have been failed by the school board. And that's why we need a new school board.
All right. I have one more question in the queue. Clarence, do you want this to be the last question, or is there another one coming?
No, this will be the last question, but I would like to forego any follow-up.
All right.
And so let's have the candidates chime in for 1 minute, please.
All right. And before I ask this last question, I just really want to thank the 3 candidates. You've done a very good job of presenting yourselves. I've done this myself. I know it's not easy. I thank Kitty, of course, for her expertise. And in the background, we have Sylvia doing translation. We have Stacy keeping time. Clarence, of course, is keeping us in order. And then Matt and Hillary, Lawrence, Dom, and Dan are all helping make this event work. And I just think that they all deserve some appreciation. The last question, and who wants to volunteer to be first?
I'll go.
As always. We'll go clockwise around the Zoom page then, so that it'll be Sheila, Mike, and Jorge, you'll finish. This question is, District 5 has a large newcomer population and children of newcomers. By newcomers, I imagine they mean immigrants to the United States. What is your plan to ensure those students have the funding they need to be adequately served? Sheila.
Yes, we do have a large newcomer population here in Oakland. It was challenging, I would say, for me, because it was my understanding that there was a school that was elected to be the school for the students to attend, for the newcomer students to attend. But that school is not located where the majority of those families were living. So they would end up going to whichever school was close to them. By rights, they should, have been able to do that, and they do that. And so then the challenge for the staff was, all right, what are we going to do? How are we going to step up our game and make sure that the newcomers are getting what they need. And luckily, I worked with a fantastic staff at United for Success in conjunction with district English learning department. And we were able to provide the services that the students needed. So I just feel that whatever, again, back to my model of, every school being a target, every school should be able to provide for every student that walks in their doors.
Mike.
Yes, this actually is one of the reasons why I've been so involved around budget issues in OUSD for the last 3 years. Because what we have in Oakland is we have some serious equity and educational justice issues. And when it comes down to it, we need dedicated funding for dedicated programs to address these issues, from newcomers to language learners to African-American males to students in special education, students with different abilities, language acquisition in general. You can go down the list of things. And what we've seen from this school board is a narrowing of services using the excuse that they don't have enough money to pay for it. We know OUSD now is projected to end this year with $65 million in their ending fund balance in the bank. That is the resources that we need to tap using the expertise that we have to fully fund all these programs that we know we need, from newcomers to language learners to everyone else. And that's really what this comes down to, a school board that's going to reprioritize our resources to serve our community.
Jorge.
Yes, directly to the question. I think this is where we have to have our full toolkit open. In the old days, when the doctor would come to visit you, they'd carry a little black bag, and that side of that black bag was all kinds of interesting things in there to check your pulse and see what kind of condition you're in. Well, that little black bag has been taken away from the teachers. We need to have a full arsenal, all the tools put back in that bag, and it has to do with bilingual education, dual language immersion, or dual language by itself, or immersion or bilingual, using all the techniques. And I agree that language issues aren't just an issue for immigrants. Our own native population, my own people here, the Mexican American Chicano community, we're still struggling around language issues. African American community is still being held to standards where language is being used as a criteria to judge them, as it is us. So this whole issue of language is not just for immigrants. It has to do with part of the apparatus of how we oppress and depress learning. More money is spent on miseducating us than educating us. So I believe that we have a budget of $787.9 million. We're going to lose 30 or 45, according to the superintendent, $1 million. So I think we can find that little black bag.
Okay, Sheila.
I answered.
Oh, we're already done? We've gone around the circle?
Yeah.
It's getting long. All right, so that concludes our questions. And again, I thank the candidates. I'm going to editorialize here for a second and say that people talk about all kinds of language needs in Oakland. That need is overwhelmingly Spanish. It is Spanish at 10 times larger than any other group. 47% of our students have at least one parent that speaks Spanish at the home. That includes my son. So I feel very strongly about that. Now we are moving on. Clarence, you want them to do 1 minute each?
Yes, 1 minute. 1 minute.
And I'll try to keep it in a certain order. 1 minute, go ahead.
Yeah, 1 minute closing statement from each candidate, starting with Sheila.
Sheila, you just keep being the starter.
Oh, okay. I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to express how I feel about being a school board member. I want to remind everybody that Sheila Pope Lawrence is running for school board because Sheila Pope Lawrence is concerned about your student. She wants your student to be a global contender. She wants your student to be able to get a job anywhere in the world. You are currently within 30-mile radius of some of the finest institutions in the world. I want every student to have access to those institutions. Vote for me, and I guarantee you that I will not just be rubber stamping what the superintendent does. I've worked for 4 superintendents. I know what they do, and I know what they're supposed to do. So I will be on watch. I will be vetting everything. I will be asking questions. That is what I do, and that's the leadership that I've exhibited for the last 29 years. So vote for Sheila Pope Lawrence. You can check my website, popelawrence.com. Thank you.
Jorge?
Yes, my name's Jorge Ledma and running for school board in District 5. I have the life experience, the educational preparation, organizational knowledge, and I'm committed and grounded in the community. And so there's nothing that I'm going to do that comes from me. I'm not particularly that creative or ingenious. I get my strength comes from being grounded and working and holding hands with the community around me. Again, thank you for listening, and vote for Jorge Ledma for School Board District 5. Thank you.
Mike Hutchinson.
Great, thank you. And thank you again, everyone, for hosting this event today, and hopefully everyone watching out there. Again, my name is Mike Hutchinson, and I'm a very proud graduate of Oakland Public Schools. I spent 25 years working in our schools in Oakland and with youth in the East Bay until the 2 schools I worked at for 10 years were closed in 2012. Since that day, I've engaged in every way possible to really try to change the direction that our schools are moving. And we have a huge opportunity this year in November. With all 4 school board incumbents deciding not to run for re-election, we have a chance to shape a new school board. And hopefully my track record over the last 10 years and my life experiences really put me in a position to be able to move these things forward after the election in November. We're really excited to build this campaign and bring everyone together around this and really send a new message that we as a community will control our schools, and we will ensure that every neighborhood has a quality public school. So again, thank you. I'm Mike Hutchinson, and check out our Facebook page, Mike Hutchinson for Oakland School Board District 5. Thank you.
Well, I would like to thank all the candidates. Did a very excellent job today, and our audience and voters and residents of our community are very proud of having you as candidates to represent us in this city, in this region, and to bring forward the types of proposals that you're suggesting in your various platforms. The next forum will be with candidates from District 1, planned for June 28th. Please visit action2020oakland.org for links to that forum. And while you are there, you can learn more about us and sign up for our email list if you wish to be kept up to date. We thank you for joining us at the forum today. A recorded version of it will be posted for all to view very soon. Have a wonderful Saturday afternoon.